She had always been quiet. Even in a room full of people, she could disappear into the background without anyone noticing. Life had taught her to stay small, to observe and to wait for the right moment. Her family had never been wealthy, and she had grown up understanding the value of every coin, every opportunity, and every word she spoke. She was not someone who demanded attention, but she had a spark inside her, one that only a few ever noticed. That day, she found herself walking into a large hall she had only seen from afar before. The place was filled with polished wooden floors that reflected the bright lights above. Rows of chairs stretched out in neat lines, and at the front, a shiny stage waited like a silent judge. People moved with a confident air, chatting loudly, adjusting their clothing, practicing their lines, or testing the instruments in the corner. She clutched her bag a little tighter, feeling the weight of the small notebook and the sheet music inside it. As soon as she entered, she noticed the stares. Some were curious, others dismissive, and a few were outright mocking. She could feel the judgment in the air, though no one had said anything yet. She walked slowly, trying to keep her head down, hoping that she could find her seat and melt into the shadows. But the whispers started almost immediately. "Who is she?" someone asked, a little too loudly. "She doesn't look like she belongs here," another voice said, and a few people snickered. She tried not to react, though her heart sank a little with every word. She had learned early on that people often judged what they did not understand. She had faced ridicule many times before, but today felt heavier somehow, because the stakes were higher. This was not just another day at school or at a small local gathering. This was a place where people's talents were celebrated, where every mistake felt like it could follow her for years, and where first impressions were remembered forever. Finding an empty seat at the back, she slid in quietly, feeling the laughter and whispers settle over her like a cold shadow. Some people glanced at her from across the room, their smiles cruel and their eyes sharp. She could feel them measuring her, imagining her failure, but she refused to let it show. She sat straight, closed her eyes for a brief moment, and tried to steady her breathing. Her mind wandered to the hours she had spent preparing. Every note she had practiced, every line she had rehearsed, every single step she had taken to reach this point played in her memory like a quiet song. She remembered late nights when the house was silent, and she was the only one awake, practicing until her fingers ached and her voice grew hoarse. She remembered the faces of her family, proud but worried, always encouraging her even when they could not understand her dreams completely. She opened her eyes and looked around again. The room was buzzing with energy, people chatting and laughing, confident in their own abilities. They had not noticed the strength in her yet. They could not see the fire she carried inside, the determination that would not let her be stopped by a few unkind words or mocking looks. She felt a small smile tug at her lips, not because she was proud, but because she knew something they did not. She knew what she was capable of, even if no one else did. Minutes passed and the event began. The host walked to the stage and welcomed everyone, speaking with practiced charm and a loud voice that carried through the hall. Participants were called one by one, walking onto the stage with confidence, bowing and beginning their performances. The crowd applauded politely, and she could see the admiration in their faces. Each person who performed seemed more impressive than the last, and her anxiety grew a little. When her name was finally called, the laughter and whispers returned, louder this time. A few people even chuckled openly, leaning back in their chairs as if to say, "This will be worth watching." She took a deep breath and stood, feeling the eyes of the entire room on her. Every step she took toward the stage felt heavier than the last, but she kept moving. She had imagined this moment so many times, and now it was real. The stage seemed larger than she had expected. The lights were bright and hot on her face, and for a moment she froze. She could hear a few murmurs, some people whispering jokes, others shaking their heads. She reminded herself why she was here. This was her chance to show the world what she had worked so hard for. She placed her bag down carefully, smoothed her clothes, and looked out at the audience. The laughter did not stop, but it did not matter. She could feel her heart pounding, but it was not fear, it was anticipation. She had spent years preparing for a moment like this, and now it was her turn. Slowly, she took her position, ready to begin, ready to transform that laughter into something else entirely. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her next move, waiting to see if the whispers were right. Little did they know, The person they had mocked had a strength and talent that no one in the room had yet seen. The quiet girl who had sat in the back, who had been underestimated and laughed at, was about to change everything. And in that moment, as she prepared to step fully into the spotlight, she felt a calm settle over her. She knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, but it would be worth it. Every look of doubt, every whisper, every laugh was just a challenge she was ready to meet. She took one last deep breath and began, unaware that the room was about to witness something unforgettable. She stood in front of the audience, feeling the heat of the lights and the weight of every pair of eyes in the room. Her hands trembled slightly, though her mind was clear. Every time she looked at the people before her, she could see their expectations. Some skeptical, some amused, and a few curious. None of them had any idea what was about to happen. She took a step closer to the instrument, her fingers brushing lightly over its surface. The room was silent except for the occasional cough and the faint shuffling of feet. She could hear her own heartbeat, steady yet urgent, echoing in her ears. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, feeling the memories of long nights and countless hours of practice flowing through her. She had done this alone many times before in rooms where no one was watching, and now she had to do it with everyone watching. The first note escaped her fingers almost timidly. It was soft, delicate, almost as if she were testing the waters. A few people snickered, thinking it was a mistake, a fluke, or simply unremarkable. She ignored them. She focused on the music, on the rhythm she had carried in her mind for years. Each note followed the last with precision, yet carried a certain softness that drew attention subtly without demanding it. Gradually, her confidence grew. The trembling in her hands faded as she allowed herself to become one with the music. She was no longer just a girl on a stage. She was the story of every long night she had spent practicing. Every moment she had chosen her dreams over distractions. Every small sacrifice she had made to be here. The room, at first full of laughter and whispers, grew quieter. Eyes that had been rolling now widened slightly. Heads turned, and the initial amusement began to fade. She could feel the energy shifting. It was subtle at first, like a slow tide, but undeniable. The people who had mocked her were now leaning forward, their smirks replaced with curiosity. Some of them exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of surprise and disbelief. The music carried her emotions, her struggles, her triumphs, and her fears. Each chord, each subtle pause told a story that words could not. As she continued, she began to see something remarkable. The audience was changing almost unconsciously. Their laughter had stopped entirely. Even the whisperers had quieted. Some were nodding slightly, others simply staring in awe. She did not pause to notice them. She was too immersed in her own world. But deep down she could sense the effect she was having. The very people who had doubted her were now listening, truly listening, in a way that went beyond casual observation. Her fingers moved with increasing confidence, flowing over the keys with precision and grace. She was not performing for applause. She was performing for herself, for the years of dedication and hard work that had brought her to this moment. Yet she could not help but notice the subtle reactions in the room. The occasional gasp, the eyes glistening with emotion, the quiet murmurs of admiration. These were small victories, but they felt monumental to her. There was a point in the music where a particularly difficult passage approached. It was a combination of speed, accuracy, and emotion that required every ounce of skill she had. For a moment she felt a flicker of fear, a brief thought that maybe she could stumble here. Maybe she could falter in front of all these eyes. But she pushed it aside. She had prepared for this. Every note had been practiced countless times, every movement ingrained in her muscle memory. She took a deep breath and let herself flow through the passage as she had done so many times before. The room was silent except for the sound of her performance. She noticed a few people holding their breath, as if afraid to blink and miss a single moment. Some faces, previously skeptical, now wore expressions of wonder. She could see the realization slowly dawning on them. The girl they had laughed at was not just competent, she was extraordinary. Every note she played seemed to convey more than just skill. It carried emotion, depth, and a sense of authenticity that could not be faked. Her mind wandered briefly to her family, who had supported her quietly from the background. She imagined their proud faces, their soft smiles, the encouragement they had given her when the world had doubted her abilities. That thought brought warmth to her chest and strengthened her resolve. She was not just performing for herself or for the audience. She was performing for everyone who had believed in her when no one else had. As she moved into the next section of the music, the technical difficulty increased even more. The notes were faster, the transitions sharper, and the emotions more intense, yet she moved through them with remarkable control, each hand knowing its place, each finger dancing across the keys with precision. The room seemed to hold its breath, caught in the spell she was weaving. Even the critics, the ones who had doubted her at the start, were now captivated. Their eyes followed her every movement, their expressions softening as the music reached them in ways words never could. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel joy, not arrogance, not pride, but a deep, fulfilling joy that came from doing something she loved at the highest level she could. It was a joy built from years of persistence, of countless setbacks, and quiet determination. She realized that the laughter that had greeted her arrival had no power over her now. It was gone, replaced by a silence filled with respect, attention, and curiosity. She looked briefly at the judges. Their eyes were wide, their pens paused above their notes, faces betraying a mixture of astonishment and admiration. She could sense that her performance was touching them, moving them, even if she did not fully understand the extent of it. The people who had laughed were no longer laughing. Some had their hands over their mouths, trying to hide expressions of disbelief, while others had tears in their eyes. The room, once buzzing with judgment, had been transformed into a space of quiet reverence. Her fingers glided over the keys, moving into the softer, more emotional section of the piece. Here she poured every bit of herself into the music, the fears, the hopes, the moments of solitude, and the memories of hard work. The sound was no longer just music. It was a conversation with everyone present. She could feel the connection, the unspoken understanding forming between her and the audience. It was a powerful moment. A moment that confirmed to her that she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the last notes of the section echoed through the hall, she noticed the subtle shift in the atmosphere. There was no applause yet, no overt acknowledgement, but the energy in the room had changed completely. Where there had been ridicule, there was now anticipation. Where there had been doubt, there was now admiration. And where there had been laughter, there was now silence, an attentive, respectful silence that spoke volumes. She took a brief pause, not because she needed it, but because she wanted to let the moment sink in, for herself and for the audience. She glanced around the room, noticing the people who had once whispered and laughed. Some had tears welling in their eyes, some were leaning forward in their seats, and some simply sat motionless, captivated by what they had just witnessed. The transformation was remarkable, and though she did not seek recognition, she felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her efforts were being acknowledged in the most profound way possible. With a deep breath, she prepared herself for the next part of her performance, the part that required both technical skill and emotional depth. She knew this was where she would truly make her mark, where she would demonstrate that she was not just talented but extraordinary. Every movement, every note, every pause was deliberate, calculated, and heartfelt. She was no longer the nervous girl who had been laughed at when she first entered the hall. She was a performer in her own right, commanding attention without even trying, letting her talent speak louder than words ever could. And as she continued, the audience remained captivated. The laughter had vanished entirely, replaced by something far more powerful: belief. They had believed she would fail, but now they were beginning to believe in her. They had underestimated her, and now they were witnessing something they could not have imagined. She could feel it in the energy of the room, in the intensity of their gaze, and in the quiet reverence that filled the hall. For the first time in her life, she truly understood the power of persistence, of quiet determination, and of believing in oneself when the world doubts you. She had faced ridicule, whispers, and judgment, but she had not allowed any of it to stop her. And in that moment, as she played with precision, passion, and unwavering focus, she realized that she was not performing for the approval of anyone else. She was performing for herself, and in doing so, she had already won. As the music continued to flow from her fingers, something remarkable happened. The room, once full of whispers and laughter, was now completely still. Every eye was fixed on her, every ear attuned to the notes she played. She felt the presence of the audience, yet she was not distracted. Instead, she allowed herself to sink deeper into the music, to let it guide her hands and carry her through every emotion she wanted to express. This was the part she had been waiting for, the section that demanded not only skill, but feeling. Each note she played was meant to tell a story, to take the listeners on a journey that went beyond sound. Her hands moved faster now, yet with grace and precision, as if each key was a word in a sentence that only she could read aloud. She felt alive in a way she never had before, as if every moment of doubt, every moment of ridicule had led her to this exact point. The first few rows of the audience were the most affected. Faces that had been skeptical now glowed with surprise and awe. Some had their hands pressed to their mouths, trying to contain the emotions rising within them. Others leaned forward in their seats as if afraid to miss a single detail. The people who had once laughed had stopped completely, their expressions unreadable at first, then slowly softening as the power of her performance took hold. She could feel the weight of the room's attention pressing down on her, yet it was not a burden. It was a recognition, a silent acknowledgement that what she was doing mattered. She had always believed in herself, but now, seeing the way the audience was reacting, she realized that belief could be contagious. People who had doubted her were now experiencing something they had never expected. Her quiet determination, her endless hours of practice, and her unwavering focus had broken through their assumptions. Every passage of the piece was deliberate. Some moments were fast and complex, demanding every ounce of technical skill she possessed. Others were slow and gentle, allowing the emotion to breathe and resonate. She had spent years learning to balance these extremes, to make the music feel alive, to tell a story without words. And now, in this hall filled with strangers who had initially mocked her, she was finally able to do just that. As she moved into a particularly emotional section, the sound seemed to fill the entire room, reaching every corner and touching every person. It was as if the music had a life of its own, carrying with it the struggles, hopes, and dreams of someone who had fought quietly for years. A few people's eyes glistened with tears, though they tried to hide it. Some clasped their hands together, almost in prayer, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling that seemed to flow effortlessly from her. She noticed a few subtle nods in the audience, small gestures of appreciation that spoke volumes. She did not need them to validate her, but seeing them brought a quiet satisfaction. She was telling a story and people were listening. That, more than anything else, was what mattered. She had always feared judgment, had always worried about being misunderstood, yet here she was, commanding attention and respect without saying a single word. The more she played, the more her confidence grew. She was no longer simply performing the notes. She was expressing herself fully, letting every emotion, every memory, and every thought flow through her. The audience felt it, even if they did not understand every technical detail. They felt the passion, the courage, and the vulnerability that she had poured into her years of practice. She had taken the laughter of strangers and turned it into silence filled with wonder. At one point, the piece demanded a particularly challenging sequence. It was fast, complex, and required precise timing and coordination between both hands. For a brief moment, she felt a flicker of fear, a tiny whisper in the back of her mind questioning if she could execute it perfectly. But she had faced fears before in empty rooms, in late nights of practice, and in moments of self-doubt. She pushed it aside, letting her training, her muscle memory, and her intuition take over. Her fingers moved flawlessly across the keys, dancing with confidence and fluidity. The effect on the audience was immediate. People gasped quietly, some leaning forward in disbelief. They had seen skill before, but this was different. This was mastery combined with heart, talent mixed with authenticity. The laughter and mocking glances of earlier had completely disappeared, replaced with expressions of awe and admiration. The energy in the room had shifted entirely. She felt herself smiling slightly as she noticed the transformation. She had walked into the hall as the quiet girl who had been underestimated, who had been laughed at. Now she was no longer defined by others' opinions. She was defined by her own abilities, by her own dedication, and by the way she had chosen to rise above the doubt. Every note, every pause, every movement was a statement of resilience and determination. Her thoughts wandered briefly to her family again, who had always believed in her. She imagined them watching her, their faces lighting up with pride, their quiet encouragement echoing in her mind. That image fueled her even more, giving her strength to continue, to push through the challenges of the piece, and to pour herself fully into every moment. She was not performing for applause or recognition. She was performing because it was her truth, her story, her voice. As she reached the climax of this section, the music became more intense, more powerful. It was no longer just a performance, it was an experience, an emotional journey that carried the audience along. Some people were visibly moved, tears rolling silently down their cheeks. Others sat in stunned silence, unable to process the sheer depth and beauty of what they were witnessing. The girl who had been laughed at had captivated everyone without trying, simply by being herself and allowing her talent to shine. The judges, who had initially raised their eyebrows in doubt, were now completely absorbed. Their expressions revealed a mixture of surprise, admiration, and respect. They had underestimated her like everyone else, but now they were witnessing something extraordinary. She did not seek their approval, but seeing their reactions confirmed what she already knew. Her hard work, her perseverance, and her belief in herself had brought her here, and nothing could take it away. She continued through the final moments of this part of the piece, her movements confident and assured. The music carried both technical brilliance and emotional depth, weaving a tapestry that was impossible to ignore. The audience felt it, the judges felt it, and even she could feel it. The energy of the room, the connection between performer and listeners, and the silent acknowledgement that something special was happening. By the time she reached the softer, quieter section again, the room was completely transformed. The people who had once laughed were now leaning forward, tears in their eyes, faces softened by the beauty of what they were hearing. They had come to expect one thing, and she had given them something far greater, a glimpse into her soul, a demonstration of resilience, and a performance that spoke louder than words ever could. For her, the moment was bittersweet. She had worked so hard to reach this point, and now as she played the softer notes, she realized how far she had come. Every challenge, every doubt, every lonely hour of practice had led to this. She was no longer just a girl trying to prove herself. She was a performer who had already won, not through applause, but through the power of her talent and her courage to rise above judgment. The last few notes of this section lingered in the air, delicate and haunting, leaving a silence that was profound in its impact. The audience was still, their attention fully captured, their emotions stirred. It was a moment of pure connection, one that transcended the boundaries of skill or technical mastery. They were no longer just watching a performance, they were witnessing a transformation, a story of resilience, talent, and the quiet power of someone who refused to be underestimated. She felt a sense of calm settle over her as she prepared to continue. The hardest part was still ahead, the section that would require everything she had, technical skill, emotional depth, and the courage to rise even higher. But she was ready. She had faced the laughter, the doubt, and the whispers, and she had come through stronger, more confident, and more connected to her own abilities than ever before. As she took a deep breath and allowed the next part of the piece to flow from her, she could feel the audience leaning in even more. The energy in the room had shifted completely, and it was now hers to carry. She was no longer the girl who had been laughed at. She was a force of talent, emotion, and authenticity. And though the journey was far from over, this moment, this transformation was proof that she had already begun to change everything around her. As the final section of her performance approached, she felt a mix of anticipation and calm settle over her. Every note she had played so far had built up to this moment, and now she knew that what she was about to do could leave a lasting impression on everyone in the room. The laughter that had greeted her arrival was long gone. In its place was silence, thick and heavy, yet full of expectation. Every eye was fixed on her. Every breath seemed to pause, waiting for her to take the next step. She felt her fingers glide over the keys with a confidence that surprised even her. The music had become an extension of her own emotions. She was not just playing notes anymore. She was telling a story, one that was deeply personal yet universally understood. She could feel the audience's hearts beating along with her rhythm. Some leaned forward, completely absorbed. Others had tears in their eyes, unable to hide their awe. She had reached the point where the technical skill she had honed for years and the depth of feeling she carried within her converged perfectly. There was a moment when she paused briefly, letting a single soft note hang in the air. The silence was profound. She could hear the subtle rustle of the audience, the faint intake of breath, the quiet realization that something extraordinary was happening. She allowed herself a small smile, not one of arrogance, but one of quiet satisfaction. She had faced doubt, ridicule, and skepticism, and yet here she was, commanding attention without demanding it, touching hearts without asking for permission. Then, with a deep breath, She launched into the most challenging part of the piece. It was fast, complex, and required every ounce of her skill, yet it flowed naturally from her hands. Every chord was precise, every transition smooth, and every note carried the emotion she intended. She felt completely in control, yet free at the same time, as if the music itself were guiding her. The audience was captivated, their focus unbroken, their reaction silent but profound. They were no longer spectators. They were participants in the story she was telling. She noticed a few people in the front rows who had been the loudest in their skepticism. Their eyes were now wide, some even glistening with tears. Others sat completely still, stunned by the display of talent and emotion unfolding before them. She did not need their validation, but seeing the transformation in their faces brought a quiet warmth to her chest. This was more than a performance. It was a turning point, a demonstration of what could happen when someone refused to be defined by others' opinions. Her mind briefly wandered to the countless hours of practice, the small, lonely moments when no one was watching. She remembered times when she had doubted herself, moments when she had wondered if her efforts were in vain. But now all of that had led to this exact moment. She realized that the struggles, the quiet persistence, and the unwavering belief in herself had prepared her for something far greater than she had imagined. She had taken the laughter and turned it into something beautiful, something powerful, something unforgettable. As the piece continued, the complexity increased even more. Rapid passages demanded perfect timing, and intricate harmonies required complete concentration. Yet she moved through it all with grace, her hands flying over the keys effortlessly. She felt a rush of exhilaration, not from pride, but from the sheer joy of doing something she loved so completely. The audience responded in their own way, silently acknowledging the brilliance unfolding before them. Some clutched their hands together, others sat in rapt attention, and a few could not hide the tears streaming down their faces. Every note, every pause, every subtle variation in tempo carried a message. She was telling her story, the story of resilience, patience, and quiet determination. She could feel the audience leaning in, sensing the power of her journey even if they did not know the details of her life. The laughter that had once defined their perception of her had been replaced by awe, respect, and deep emotional connection. She had turned doubt into admiration, ridicule into reverence, and skepticism into belief. The music reached a point where emotion overwhelmed technique. Here she allowed herself to pour everything she had into the performance. Every thought, every struggle, every moment of fear and triumph was expressed through her hands, through the subtle changes in rhythm and tone. The room seemed to hold its breath, every listener captivated, unable to tear their eyes away. She was no longer simply performing. She was transforming the space, connecting with people on a level beyond words. She glanced briefly at the judges, noticing their expressions of astonishment and respect. They had underestimated her, as had the rest of the audience, but now they were witnessing something that transcended talent alone. It was courage, persistence, and authenticity combined, and it could not be ignored. She felt a quiet thrill at the realization that she had not only performed a difficult piece flawlessly, but had also touched people in a way that no one could have predicted. Her hands moved faster now, flying over the keys with precision, yet the music remained full of emotion. Each note seemed to soar, carrying with it a sense of triumph, a sense of overcoming, a sense of beauty born from struggle. The audience was completely absorbed, some leaning forward, some with hands pressed over their mouths, and some simply sitting in stunned silence, unable to process the magnitude of what they were hearing. She could feel the transformation in the room. It was as if the air itself had changed, charged with admiration and awe. Then came the final passage, the climax of the piece. It demanded everything she had: speed, accuracy, emotion, and control. Her fingers moved with perfect coordination, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm and her mind completely focused. She allowed herself to feel every emotion, every memory, every long night of practice, and every moment of self-doubt that had led her here. The audience could feel it too, their eyes widening, their breath caught in their throats, their hearts racing along with the music. When she finally reached the last note, she held it, letting it linger in the air. The silence that followed was profound. No one moved, no one spoke, no one breathed too loudly. The note seemed to carry all of her effort, all of her dedication, and all of her journey, leaving a mark on every person in the room. And then slowly the applause began. At first it was hesitant, almost unsure, but it grew rapidly. filling the hall with a sound that was both thunderous and heartfelt. People stood, some cheering, some clapping, some wiping tears from their eyes. She stood there for a moment, letting the applause wash over her, feeling a mixture of relief, joy, and quiet pride. She had faced doubt, ridicule, and judgment, and she had risen above it all. The people who had laughed at her when she first entered the room were now among those applauding the loudest. Some could barely speak, their emotions too strong to contain. It was a moment she would never forget, a moment that confirmed what she had always known, that talent, courage, and persistence could overcome even the harshest judgment. As the applause continued, she allowed herself a small bow. She had proven something not just to the audience, but to herself. She had faced every fear, every doubt, every mocking glance, and had come through stronger, more confident and more connected to her own abilities than ever before. The room had changed, and so had she. The laughter had been replaced by tears, smiles, and awe. The ridicule had been replaced by respect and admiration, and the quiet girl who had sat nervously at the back had become a presence impossible to ignore. She gathered her belongings slowly, savoring the moment. The audience continued to applaud, some standing, some clapping with hands raised high. She could feel the energy, the emotions, the unspoken acknowledgement that she had done something extraordinary. For her, it was not about recognition, fame, or approval. It was about proving to herself that she could rise above doubt, that she could transform fear into strength, and that she could touch hearts without saying a word. As she walked off the stage, the smiles and whispers of admiration followed her. People who had once laughed now looked at her with a mixture of awe and respect. She had transformed not only their perception of her, but also the energy of the entire room. Every note she had played, every emotion she had poured into the music, had left a mark on everyone present. It was a triumph not just of skill, but of courage, perseverance, and authenticity. In that moment, she realized that the journey had been just as important as the destination. The struggles, the practice, the doubts, and the quiet moments of determination had all led to this climax. And as she stepped away from the stage, she knew that nothing could ever take away the strength she had discovered within herself. She had faced laughter, ridicule, and doubt, and had turned it all into something beautiful, powerful, and unforgettable. The applause continued long after she had stepped away from the stage. At first, it felt overwhelming, almost unreal. But as she walked toward the exit, she began to take it in. Every clap, every cheer, every whispered word of admiration reminded her that the world could change in an instant when someone refused to be underestimated. She had walked in quietly, laughed at, and dismissed. She had left a mark that no one could ignore. She paused in the hallway outside the main hall, catching her breath. The echoes of the audience's reactions still rang in her ears. It was more than applause. It was acknowledgement, respect, and, for some, a quiet sense of wonder. People who had scoffed at her when she arrived were now speaking her name with admiration, shaking their heads in disbelief at the talent they had witnessed. Some came forward to congratulate her, their voices warm and sincere. The experience was surreal, but at the same time it was deeply grounding. She realized that the courage she had carried into the hall had created a ripple effect that reached everyone present. She thought back to the first moments she had entered that room. She remembered the whispers, the laughter, and the dismissive glances. For a brief instant, a flicker of fear returned, recalling those judgments, but she quickly pushed it aside. Those moments had been part of the journey, part of the reason her performance carried so much meaning. The ridicule had tested her resilience, the doubt had sharpened her focus, and the whispers had fueled her determination. None of it had defeated her. Instead, it had shaped her, strengthened her, and prepared her for this very moment of triumph. As she made her way to the reception area, she noticed familiar faces, family and friends who had supported her quietly from the sidelines. Their smiles were wide, eyes gleaming with pride. They did not need to speak. She could feel their joy and relief. They had believed in her all along, had witnessed her dedication in countless small moments, and now they were able to share in the recognition of her achievement. She felt a warm sense of connection and gratitude, knowing that her journey was never hers alone. It had been built with their support, their quiet encouragement, and their unwavering faith. People continued to approach her. Some offered congratulations, some asked questions about her preparation, and some simply shook their heads in astonishment. One by one, she listened and responded, her smile genuine, her eyes bright. She realized that this was not just a celebration of her talent, but a moment of inspiration for others. She had shown them what could happen when someone refused to be defined by doubt, when someone worked quietly and persistently toward their dreams. Her story, her performance, had become more than just a display of skill. It had become a lesson in courage and determination. As the evening wore on, she found a quiet corner to reflect. She sat down, still holding her bag, her thoughts drifting over everything that had happened. The hall, the audience, the applause, all of it felt like a dream. Yet it was real, and it had changed something inside her. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, not just for the applause or the recognition, but for the realization that she had faced her fears, embraced her talent, and transformed doubt into admiration. She had proven to herself that persistence and authenticity could overcome even the harshest judgment. Her mind wandered back to the early days of practice. She remembered the empty rooms, the late nights, the aching fingers, and the countless moments of self-doubt. She remembered wondering if anyone would ever notice, if all her effort was worth it. And now, sitting quietly after her triumph, she realized that every moment had been worth it. Each struggle, each setback, each lonely hour had led to this. A moment where her talent, courage, and determination were recognized and celebrated. It was a validation not just of skill, but of character, resilience, and heart. She thought about the audience members who had once laughed. She imagined their surprise, the shift in their expressions as the performance unfolded, and the emotional response that had followed. She realized that her impact went beyond music or skill. It was about challenging perceptions, breaking assumptions, and inspiring others to see what was possible. The laughter that had once defined her entrance had been replaced by respect, awe, and a deep emotional connection. She understood then that moments like these had the power to change more than just the performer. They could change the hearts and minds of everyone who witnessed them. She remembered the judges who had watched skeptically at first, but ended in admiration. Their expressions had shifted from doubt to awe, and she could sense the respect in the way they now spoke of her performance. It was a powerful reminder that even those with authority and experience could be surprised, moved, and inspired when someone gave their best, unwavering effort. She felt gratitude for their acknowledgement, yet she knew that the true reward had been in the connection she had created, the silent understanding that had passed between her and every listener. The reception slowly began to wind down. People started leaving, talking excitedly about the performance they had witnessed. She overheard snippets of conversation, words like unbelievable, incredible, and so talented. She smiled quietly, knowing that she had exceeded expectations. Not for the sake of proving anyone wrong, but because she had given everything she had to the moment. She had been true to herself, and in doing so had inspired others. The applause, the compliments, and the admiration were meaningful, but they were only part of the story. The real triumph was the journey, the courage and the quiet strength that had brought her to this point. She thought about the lessons she had learned. First, she had learned that persistence mattered more than talent alone. The hours of practice, the sacrifices, and the determination had shaped her in ways that were invisible to others, but crucial to her success. Second, she realized the power of believing in oneself, even when the world doubted, laughed, or mocked. Her self-belief had carried her through moments of fear and insecurity, giving her the strength to rise above judgment. Third, she understood that true impact came from authenticity. By being herself, embracing her own abilities, and expressing her genuine emotions, she had created a connection that went beyond skill or performance. It had touched hearts. As the last few people left, she took a deep breath and looked around the empty hall. The space that had once felt intimidating, filled with judgment and doubt, now felt alive with the echoes of her triumph. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the quiet mornings, the late nights, the lonely practice sessions, the fear, the doubt, and the perseverance. Every step had mattered, every challenge had shaped her, and every moment had prepared her for this extraordinary experience. She stood and gathered her belongings, walking slowly toward the exit. The night air was cool and refreshing as she stepped outside, carrying with her not only her bag and sheet music but also a profound sense of accomplishment. She realized that this experience had changed her, not only in the eyes of others but in the way she saw herself. She had faced judgment, ridicule, and doubt, and had emerged stronger, more confident, and deeply connected to her own abilities. She had proven that determination and authenticity could overcome even the harshest expectations. As she walked home, She reflected on the people who had witnessed her performance. She thought about the skeptics, the doubters, and the ones who had laughed. She hoped that they would remember more than just the skill. They would remember the courage, the perseverance, and the quiet strength of someone who refused to be defined by others. She understood that her story could inspire, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. It was a story of human resilience, of dedication, and of the power of believing in oneself. Arriving home, she was greeted by the warmth of her family. Their smiles, hugs, and quiet words of pride were more meaningful than any applause or recognition. They had always believed in her, even when no one else did. She realized that while the audience had witnessed her triumph, her family had been part of it all along. They had supported her quietly, encouraged her, and shared in her dedication. And now together, they could celebrate the result of all that hard work, love, and belief. As she prepared for bed that night, her mind was full of gratitude and reflection. She understood that life would continue to present challenges, doubts, and moments of uncertainty. But she also knew that she had discovered a strength within herself that could carry her through anything. The laughter, the doubt, and the ridicule had not defeated her, they had shaped her. And the triumph, the applause, and the admiration had confirmed what she had always known, that resilience, dedication, and authenticity could change everything. She drifted to sleep with a sense of peace and fulfillment. She had faced fear, risen above doubt, and transformed a moment of ridicule into a moment of triumph. She had touched hearts, inspired others, and most importantly, discovered the depth of her own courage. She was no longer the quiet girl who had been laughed at. She was someone who had proven, to herself and to the world, that strength, perseverance, and authenticity were more powerful than any judgment. And in that quiet, reflective night, she understood something fundamental. The journey mattered just as much as the moment itself. The years of practice, the moments of doubt, the challenges and sacrifices, all of it had prepared her not only to succeed but to inspire. She had walked into a room full of skeptics and left it filled with admiration and awe. She had turned laughter into tears of emotion, doubt into respect, and ridicule into acknowledgement. And in doing so, she had become a living example of what could happen when someone refused to be underestimated, when someone believed in themselves, and when someone allowed their true talent to shine.